Hi, I'm Stephen Patterson from Matisse Derivan, and in today's quick lesson I've got a really interesting technique that anyone can do. The technique's called photo image transfer, and what we're going to do with the use of some varnish is take this image and transfer it to another surface. Now the way we go about doing that is, and I'll just start doing it now, we've got an image here on this piece of paper. We're going to use polymer gloss varnish, and we're going to apply 2 to 3 coats, and we can take this straight out of the container. Just try and keep the coats nice and thin. And we're going to apply this varnish so we build up a few coats so there's actually some substance to the varnish. Now the thing to remember, the images must be an ink type image. So when we say a photo transfer, you can't actually use a photo. You'll need to take a colour photocopy, or a black and white photocopy is fine, of that image. Okay, so we'll just leave that there for the second. You can use a magazine as long as the ink is exposed. If you try using a glossy magazine, the problem is there's already a varnish over the top of the ink. The ink needs to be exposed so that the polymer gloss varnish can actually adhere to it. So we'll put 2 or 3 more coats on here, and then what we're going to do is, once this is fully dry, we're going to soak it in this tray in some water, and we're going to rub the paper off the back. Now once we take the paper off the back, we'll just be left with this film of varnish with the ink impregnated in it. And we can take that and adhere it to another surface. And the great thing is, it doesn't have to be a flat surface, it can be a 3-dimensional surface. So I'm going to go ahead and do a few more coats, and I'll be back in a while. Now our 3rd coat of varnish is dry. I've trimmed the edges off, and we're good to soak the image in some water and start rubbing the paper off the back. We've let this dry for about 24 or 48 hours. The longer you can leave it dry, the better. So just any sort of normal water. And that's starting to soak in a little bit already. The varnish is going to go white. It'll go back to the form that it takes when water's in it. And basically we're just going to let this soak for a while, and I'm going to rub the back. And what's going to happen is the paper is going to start coming away from the varnish, and we'll be left with something a bit like cling film, and the image impregnated into the varnish. Okay, we'll be back in a little while once we've got some of the paper off. So we've finished taking all the paper off the back, and keep in mind, don't be impatient with this. You might have to take several hours to let the paper the water soak into the paper and the paper soften, so you're going to be able to get it off the back. You're going to rub just around like this, making use of the paper that's coming off to sort of rub the rest of the paper off. Now it might go a little bit milky, that's fine. What we're going to do now is take the transfer image, and we're just going to drip off some of the water. You can see this is just the varnish with the image left inside. We're just going to take it over here and let it dry off a little bit. So we flatten it out. Take a little bit more paper towel just to get the water off it. And while that's drying, I'm just going to use a little bit more of the polymer gloss varnish to sort of use as a glue to adhere the image down. And this will also help us move let us move the image around. Now one thing to keep in mind with the inks that are in the varnish now, they're not like normal artist quality paints where they won't fade. Most printing inks will fade, and some of them can fade really quickly. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at doing this with your artwork. So we have the image all in one piece, and I'm just going to do my best to get this in the middle. You should have a little bit of time before it dries, and then we've got to try and get the air bubbles out. And then I'll probably varnish the whole thing, but leave the image time to dry. Get as many of the air bubbles out as you lay it down. And then we're not going to varnish this until the whole lot's had time to dry, because it's been soaking in the water for so long. The varnish has accepted some water back into it. So I'm just going to work away with my hands here for a few minutes and flatten the image right out. Make sure you get all the air bubbles out. Move them out to the sides, and you'll see the varnish from underneath that we're using, the wet varnish, will be coming out with it. And you can just wet your fingers a little bit to let them slide across and get all the air bubbles out. And the varnish underneath, as I say, is just allowing this to slide. And as I said before, you can apply this to pretty well any sort of surface. Okay, we're pretty close. If you get something else, and just do your best to get all those air bubbles out. Try not to stretch it out of shape too much. And you'll see around the edges here where we left a little bit of the image, at least a little bit of the varnish. This will clear off as the varnish dries out. And then I'll probably put another coat over the whole lot to even up the sheen level. So now that we've got all the bubbles out, we'll leave our image to dry. You can see it's starting to dry a little bit on the edge, and the gold is starting to come through as the varnish clears. And we'll leave this for about 24, 48 hours before we put another coat of varnish over the whole thing, just to hold it all together and to even up the sheen. So this technique can be used obviously with all sorts of different images on many, many different surfaces. As I mentioned before, on three-dimensional surfaces, as you could see, we could wrap the image around and adhere it using the polymer gloss varnish. And indeed, you could even use paint. You put a coat of the polymer gloss varnish down first, then the paint, and another coat of the polymer gloss varnish over the top. You might use something non-porous like glass to paint on, and that'll come off in the water really easily, and you've got an image that you can stick to all sorts of other things. There's plenty of different ideas that you can use this technique with. I'm Stephen Patterson. Thank you very much for joining me.